All right, this is Listen to Tony with Maksym Petyak. So Maksym is a full stack web developer with experience working in startups. He did his master's, or he did your master's, in computer science at Oxford University, focusing on deep learning. And afterwards, also you worked on several smaller consultancy projects around computer vision. Here's a quote from your LinkedIn. I
Hope you
am
notice that.
passionate. I am passionate about using the latest technologies to make a real and lasting impact on people's lives. Working in startups has taught me to enjoy the kind of chaotic environment that sparks creativity and innovation. Let's start with chaos. Why is chaos something that you relish?
I wouldn't really put it that way. Yeah, I thrive in chaos. No, but I do think that there's a quote I think from Eric Schmidt that I really like, which is that um, okay, I don't want to really quote him, but he basically it's kind of like innovation is almost like a controlled explosion,
Yeah.
and you kind of like need to have a little bit of this like chaotic environment or lack of maybe like processes rules a little bit where someone can just like try out and do something very quickly, and see how it works. And then maybe is it like ideas can come from anywhere. And I think that's like the case with startups and why they're good at um like innovating, basically trying new approaches because you don't really have like large corps, kind of like a lot of meetings. People can just like propose something very quickly. They can do something very quickly and they can see what works. Yeah.
How does one try to innovate in the space called artificial intelligence? Because it's a nascent thing. It's been around for like, actually, what's the history? Let's start there. What's the history of AI? Um,
Oof.
'Cause
This
that's
is
what you're into.
really,
That's what
really, really,
that's what you
really
want to.
testing my knowledge. Yeah,
Yeah.
no. That's interesting. So, and I would maybe separate it a little bit into like two phases. Right now, we're really in the like machine learning slash deep learning, actually specifically phase. So, it started from around like 2012. But before that, I mean, AI dates back to like as soon basically as computers came, right? So it was like 50s, 40s, where people started thinking about like, okay, how do you play like checkers, like the early chatbots, etc. But but a lot of AI earlier was actually around just hard coded rules. So people would think about like how you play checkers and then maybe do like a search, So you're like, okay, I can do this move. And then I try to think about like what the position is. It a good position? And then like I try to see what happens when I do next move, right? And then the computer kind of like plays out the game a little bit in the future, and
Mm.
then evaluates kind of like the position using again some like very hard coded like rule, maybe like just like scoring how many pieces you have left.
What does it mean to hard code?
Well, I mean, you just probably was the wrong term, but like you actually like write out by a human what is the rules there, kind of to
Mm.
evaluate the position, right?
Mm.
But the phase we're in right now, which is more like machine learning, is actually kind of like forget about everything. All you do is you gather some data, you specify what you want the algorithm to learn, and the algorithm like trains on that data. I think a good example for this would be to consider like Deep Blue. So the chess algorithm, right? Who won against Kasparov, I think, versus what we saw with AlphaGo. So there, with Deep Blue, it was more like okay, it had a certain set of openings that it would play, I think, and then it would just use like search and a complex again like function that they hardcoded about how to evaluate how good a position is, right? With AlphaGo, it was actually more the algorithm plays against itself, and then it learns how to evaluate what positions are simply just by like playing against itself many many times,
Mm.
right? So this was like I don't want to say there's and like one way to maybe think about it is like you could put almost any other game in that kind of like algorithm. It's like this 2D kind of like board game, right? And we'll still learn how to play it probably in like above human levels at all. And with chess, it was like very, very specifically optimized because like humans had to be like, okay, how do you
Do we have to
position?
set rules for AI in order for it to flourish? I learned about this term human-centered, or like this movement, human-centered AI.
Someone's been talking to Steven.
Yeah, and just like yesterday, and he
That's
sent me a
funny.
few links, and I started reading about all the precautions you need to take when dealing with an AI model.
Mm-mm.
Why?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. So with this example, right, you basically you want the algorithm to learn something. And it's very obviously hard to specify, and you usually have like some function that tries to minimize, optimize, right? Or so that would be like an error in prediction, like you want to predict the number of sales, for example, right, from quarter to quarter, and it gives you an output number, and then you see like, okay, how is that number that model gave you, and what's the difference with the number that actually was, right? And then you can have like an error, and then you create like a loss, and you kind of like teach algorithm that way. But especially like in more complex examples, it's very easy maybe for it to learn something. It's maybe not what human initially thought it would learn, and with games you kind of like
'Cause
see it.
you just put
Yeah,
it it's kind of like having, like, you're giving it, you're putting on a playground, and you leave all the different tools, for it to and you don't say, "Okay, you can only use, a shovel," but you leave everything, and you hope it's gonna use a shovel,
yeah,
but
yeah,
then it
yeah.
uses everything else, and it builds, like, a massive, say, I don't know, laser weapon and, like, kills all the kids in the playground.
Yeah, and I see, yeah, exactly, and I think that, yeah, no, or for example, you have a robot and you ask it to clean, I don't know, the room, right? And
Yeah.
it's kind of like, what does it mean to clean the room? There's like no rubbish on the floor, right? And then it just like stands there and looks at the wall, like closes its eyes because then it sees like no rubbish on the floor, right? So there could be like misalignment, and I think a lot of like also an umbrella term for this kind of like AI alignment between like what you kind of like human expected to learn, which is how an agent learns to optimize for this function, but maybe like creative ways. And I think there's also a lot of examples in games where you maybe want to like teach a machine to like kind of like walk,
Mm.
right? And then it learns how to like crawl, but like very, very efficiently and quicker. Because what you optimize for is like the kind of like distance that you can travel, and then it just like weirdly crawls around basically forward. And then you see like such examples where it's like the behaviors that people really didn't expect, but it learned to, because it like from the algorithm perspective, it just optimized for a specific like function.
So right now, the top
Yeah.
minds working in AI are using their creativity to limit the creativity of artificial intelligence. Is that it?
I wouldn't say limit the creativity necessarily. I mean, I like the way you put it, but I think it's more about like, and I listen to the term for this, like usually alignment. Like how do we actually make sure that what AI learns to do aligns with our values and our expectations, what it should be doing.
Mm.
Yeah.
What are the like? Because I assume it's a bunch of people. It's not like there's like some universal panel like the United Nation has some like AI alignment working committee. It's probably from what I understood, it's a few companies in like the big tech like Google, Microsoft, or a few like larger startups now like OpenAI working on this. What or even yourself, like you're working in the field. What are like the guiding principles, or how do you make sure that it is actually designed for everyone?
Yeah. So I would just look into, there are, especially like big tech corporations, they do release like certain guidelines around how to design these systems, and they try to basically encourage people to account for bias in the training data, for example, those kind of things. Yeah, I think there's some of them like Google and Facebook. One of them is called Pear. Um, but specifically on this, I like not super expert, to be honest. But yeah, but I
Totally.
would look into the like large companies, basically AI guidelines. They do
How did you
release
get
those.
into an AI?
I actually kind of always, yeah, wanted to do this pretty much, to be honest. Yeah, it was a pretty like linear path with a bit of a deviation recently in the years with more like full stack developer job. But yeah, I think now
Full stack is
especially,
like you're a developer that can do anything, front end, back end,
yeah, it's
just for
usually
like
just like
the
front end and back end. Yeah,
okay,
that's,
just
that's usually the split.
definitions. Yeah.
Yeah. um, but yeah, no, I was quite interesting, and I focused mostly on AI during university. So it's like
How
taking
do you
all the
make that
courses.
decision? What's like the because again, it's not like most kids are working or like dreaming of being an AI.
Mhm.
Um,
I
I
don't.
didn't stumble
Right,
upon,
right.
studying AI. How do you what's the path, or like what's the right framework to go about this? Or I mean not right, but like what was your
Yeah.
just to
Mhm.
like inspire maybe like future
Yeah,
listeners.
no. I think there's genuinely like first of all, there's like now is an extremely good time to work on this. There's so much progress happening. But I think generally like
So it's crypto now.
uh yeah, but yeah. I don't even want to go there.
Okay.
No, but I think generally like when you think about artificial intelligence, it's like the ultimate problem to solve, right? Like if we solve intelligence, we solve everything else. I think like kind of like DeepMind and other ones like OpenAI think about in these terms as well. Like if we manage to make an AI that help be like a human scientist level, like imagine how much we can like progress the civilization forward. Like
Yeah.
it is like I do think that artificial intelligence like it is the ultimate problem, and after we solve that, yeah, I mean you can just use it to solve any other problem, or it kills us all. So that's also a possibility. But
Why?
generally,
Why?
yeah.
If you said when we solve intelligence, like we're set, like why is this a bottleneck versus other people might say we just need if we have more resources, like oil is going to cost $5 per barrel versus $130. Then that would unlock like incredible progress, and we could already go to Mars, etc., because it'd be cheaper. Why is intelligence so? Because do you, or maybe is what you're trying to say is that we already reached the limits of human intelligence and what we can do as a species, and that's why we need to really work on like now is the time to work on this because if we same like with the climate stuff, right? Like if we don't
Hmm.
figure out like renewables, then we're all gonna be dead. Like if we don't figure out a new way for our intelligence or like to enhance our own intelligence, then
Hmm.
we're doomed and like no more innovation and we're gonna be stuck with like more apps, social media apps and bullshit like this because we cannot cross that chasm of innovation.
Yeah, yeah. I think a few things like there is generally. I do think there's like something about reaching limits of human intelligence. And when you think about like how much does a person need to learn right now to do something like innovative in physics, or like is it more like individual genius is like kind of like 100 years ago, you have Einstein, or is it more like giant research institution and like especially when
Mm.
it comes to like innovations on the like combinations of field where you kind of like need people with multiple PhDs. But I wasn't even just like thinking on that area. I do think that now there's like a few factors that make especially effective now that is like the cost of compute is going down exponentially.
Mm.
We're generating data exponentially. And yeah, those things are pretty much what you need to do the algorithms well, especially for machine learning. And yeah, so the trend is likely to continue. And there's also like a shit ton of research and basically interest right now in the field. So it's like super, super hard actually to keep up with what's happening. Like if you want to keep up with AI, you don't even like read necessarily like textbooks because they're like I won't say outdated, but like a little bit behind very, very quickly. You really do need to read like papers and see like, okay, what happened on the like latest conference, because the field
Mm.
is really going. And when you look at like a number of publications, I think since around like 2012 or 2016, it's like doubling exponentially or like number of submissions. So there's a lot of interest, there's a lot of compute, a lot of data, and all of these factors kind of like compound. Yeah, it's a lot of progress.
Where's the intrinsic motivation though from your side? Because I get the good timing. Was it just purely that you were thinking, "What do I do?"
No,
Um,
actually, like back in university, I honestly just was like, oh, it's cool. And it like makes sense that it's like a perfect problem to solve. And like, part of it is actually, I was like really interested in physics as well, but I was also feeling that I'm like kind of like a little bit limited. You do need to have like so much kind of like knowledge to find like the next big physics thing, or like
I don't
discovers
know.
the
Newton was sitting by a tree and he got hit by an apple. He
yeah,
figured
yeah,
it
yeah,
out.
yeah. And I think it was kind of like also thinking about like, okay, what's the I guess this comes back to this like ultimate problem where it's like, okay, if we solve intelligence, how can we actually solve all these other problems that comes from it? And I didn't really think about it like, oh, now it's a
What are the
good time.
problems concretely? What problems do you want to solve? What kind of intelligence do we or what will AI bring to the table
I mean,
that
everything you can imagine is good about the future, solving aging, understanding the universe. I was listening to Andrew Carpati recently interview on Lex Friedman podcast. That was very, very interesting. And I like how
shout out to Lex?
uh, my guy, Uh,
Yeah.
and he was, I like some of his thoughts around like thinking of like we're living in the universe as, universe also based by certain rules, of course. And he's like, are there any almost like exploits that we can find, Because like, okay, if there's like a computer running this thing, is there like an equivalent of buffer overflow there that could happen, or like what kind of like hacks or could we discover? It's like maybe a multiverse thing, and you can go somewhere else. And I do think just like understanding, yeah, the universe and our place in it will most likely be done by a super intelligent AI.
Understanding our place in the universe.
Or like how universe works, maybe like let's put it this way. Yeah.
Is it just like having the computing power to take all the data that's being gathered by all the different satellites that are out there and making sense out of that? Is that
Yeah, maybe partially, but also partially maybe like just being extremely, extremely good at math slash physics, you know?
mm. And when you said solving aging, that was the first thing that came to your
Yeah,
mind.
no, but that's because I do think there's like a lot of problems, you know, in the world that still
But
need to
how
be
does it
solved.
solve aging? Like just like I'm like 80 and I can think like a 20-year-old? Is that
No, I mean, there's a lot of like, for example, uses of AI in drug discovery right now, right? And it will get better. Like if you believe that, like I don't know, biologists and scientists working on healthcare can with time improve this, and like I do believe this, and I see there's a lot of research. You know, it's like okay, how can AI help them and slash like find better drugs or solutions? You know,
why do
yeah.
they call it like, when you have augmented reality, it's not artificial reality or like there's virtual. Why don't they call it like augmented intelligence? Why is it artificial intelligence?
It's a good question. I think actually wouldn't like define augmented, but if someone said augmented intelligence to me, I would kind of think that they mostly think about how AI is helping someone necessarily like do their jobs. You
Mm.
know, yeah. So maybe like AI writing assistant or something like this.
Is there some fear
Uh,
associated or like is that part of the motivation to be into this that you fear, for example, yourself death or losing your intellectual edge or something like this? That's why you think you should or you really want to work on this field because is it personal at all?
yeah, no, I like. I mean, of course, like I fear death and everything. But actually, for me, I don't know. Like, I would struggle to think of a more important work being done right now in the world than
Mm.
the work done at like companies like OpenAI or DeepMind. You know, they're trying to solve intelligence and actually creating maybe the first general artificial intelligence. You know,
Just like pause
uh,
here, most important because it's actually the key to solving the other important
yeah.
issues that are
Oh, it might kill
like
us
cl-
all. Like, I'm not like super proponent of
but
like Terminator scenarios, but
yeah.
like, yeah, though,
But do you
yeah,
see it like, okay, it's gonna help us figure out how we're gonna help or like alleviate the climate crisis,
yeah, yeah, for
aging,
sure.
everything.
Yeah.
Okay.
In general, I think there's gonna be just like a lot of changes about how people live. You know, what's place of society. What if someone can suddenly do your
Paint me a
job?
picture. What's the
Um,
today's Stable Diffusion 2 was like released or
yeah,
yesterday,
no,
right?
exactly,
What
right?
what
Like,
what is that kind of why is that important, for example?
right. So stable diffusion, these models do is say basically generate some images from text. And yeah, they're just like really, really good at this. But the reason stable diffusion was also such a big deal is that it's very like efficient. It's pretty
Mm,
cheap to run. You can actually run it on your phone by now. It takes like a minute, but yeah, there's like someone optimized it a little bit to run on your phone.
I wanna check that shit out with you
Yeah,
after the podcast,
I'll
yeah.
send you the link on there. But you can also do it online. There's like a lot of like solutions and APIs where you can just like type some text, get an image
Mm,
back. Yeah, and I think what's impressive, like when you start playing around with it, you will start realizing how much it basically knows about just like the world. And like same with like GPT-3, which is more like the language models. But you can say something like Homer Simpson, like in a like Titanic scene, you know, and it finally like knows what the Homer Simpson is, what Titanic scene like looks like, maybe when they're on the ship, and then it can draw both of those, you
I
know.
get that, that's
I
cool
think it's
stuff.
like really, yeah, exactly, really
But,
impressive.
like, that's it, it's cool, but, like, how is it useful?
Yeah, well, the applications there will most likely be in media, basically in creative production. You know, so this is like again, we are like this is the
So
first
more people can
version,
go work in
right?
artificial intelligence because like you can't study any more of this, or there's no point in studying like I don't know, becoming a painter or creative because that's already covered by artificial intelligence. Uh, become a slave to making it even better.
Yeah, I don't think that necessarily happens. I do think that like the barrier is just going to become very, very low. Like anyone could be like generate a logo for themselves. You know, like maybe you don't need to ask a professional graphic designer. You know, just for like something small. I think when it comes to like movie production, for example, also maybe like people will be able to generate small movies just like by using text, you know,
Mm.
and that look like really, really professional, right? And of course, like in the actual professional setting, expert might use text to do the changes themselves.
There are
Uh,
probably so many things that they want to
yeah,
like put a break on or like frame it in a way that it doesn't go. We spoke about this playground example or like sandbox, where
Mhm.
like it's maybe you shouldn't be able to do any type of movie or use any type of like, or I'm just gonna imagine like, hey, I make a movie with like you doing some really dangerous or stupid or
Yeah,
offensive
yeah.
stuff.
Or like, and this is like something that I bet will happen. It's just gonna be like super controversial. Like someone could use it to generate porn, maybe. That would prime example. Like,
No.
yeah. But it's interesting also because Stable Diffusion was actually open source, so anyone can use it, as opposed to maybe company like OpenAI, and I know they're called open, but they actually don't just open source their models.
Why? What's the difference between open source and
So open source, like literally they put up on the GitHub, anyone can like download the weights, do anything they want to do with this. And for OpenAI, they just like provide the API. I mean, they publish like papers, so people have like good idea what's going on there. But they don't like say, okay, this is a trained weights and everything. All right, you
what's
just
the difference between having just an API versus being open source? I get open source,
well, oh
you go
yeah,
on GitHub, you download it, like, and then you can play around it yourself.
yeah. Well,
Like,
and anyone like knows exactly what's going on and maybe can like retrain it a little bit, right, for their use case, like
yeah.
fine tune it, for example, and they can run it on their own hardware and they can experiment with it more. They can integrate it in
And with
whatever
the API,
plugins.
how does it work?
If you just call an API, so you say like, get and from this endpoint and this maybe text or post, sorry, but yeah, no, you like don't really know what's going on under the hood. You just ask like, hey, I want an image based on this text, and they go, okay, here's your image, right? That's it. I was
That's the
yeah.
difference. So open source means like you can see exactly how the code
Yeah,
is
yeah.
working.
Like it's how someone just like someone not just trains this model, they put it online and everyone can find it, right?
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I mean, Stability, they also provide like APIs that you can use for convenience, right? But if you want, you can run like your own API quite easily because again, they open sourced everything. So
So providing the API is the safer route slash what we kind of want to do because it helps us avoid potential misuses of.
yeah, yeah. I mean, that's a big question to be honest. Like, I kind of get why OpenAI doesn't want to open source necessarily this thing because there's and also with GPT-3, I think it's even a greater example. So GPT-3 is like the language model
Mm.
where you can kind of like dump some text and it will like auto complete it for you in different ways, but it's like really, really smart. So you can be like, write a small story about like X and then it gives you back a story, right? And what they did, I think also they run like experiments they put in their original paper was they asked people to differentiate between kind of like fake generated articles by GPT-3 and the real articles. And people, especially like the larger version of the model, were very, very bad at it, like a little bit better than random chance. So I think like being in that position, like myself, and thinking like, okay, do we open source this, knowing that someone could generate potentially, maybe like in Russia or like North Korea, they could generate like a fake information very, very cheaply and also pretty well. Yeah, I don't know, right? But then like for the other way around, you can say that like, okay, now we have this private company, nobody knows what they're doing, right? And they have like kind of like unique access to this technology, as opposed to it's like when it's open source, then everyone kind of like knows how things work, and then it's like a discussion around okay, how do we apply it? What should
Mm.
be the regulation? So I can see two sides of this. I think it's like
Yeah, what's your
it's,
message to kids who are like 12 right now or something? They have enough conscious, like they've read about this online. There are these examples of like some people using this to create like using GPT-3. There was this like girl, I guess, on Twitter posting how she used to take $100 fee for writing an essay for
all
her
right.
friends, and like she would just use GPT. But what's your
Yeah.
message to people who see this? They're young and they think like, what's the point? Like, why would I learn? Why would I go to school? Why would I try to like race against something that's already so sophisticated and it's probably going to be able to do all the stuff that I was or my parents were supposed to do when they were entering their careers? Instead, I'd rather just like play Call of Duty or something or become a YouTuber and create like some weird content because that's the only thing that AI maybe is not that good in terms of like creating weird shit
Right, right,
on that
right.
level.
I think AI might be quite good with creating weird shit, right?
Yeah.
Again, going back with
Oh
the
yeah,
image
because you
generation.
mentioned
Yeah,
the point.
I
Yeah.
know, but I know what you mean. I do think there will be like it's a bit early, but maybe like 20 years from now, there will be really big questions around like meaning, basically, and what do we live for?
Yeah.
Because we like tie our value in society in general a lot with like the work that we do, and then if kind of like if AI can do most of the work, and it's very hard to find what you can actually do. Like, how will people find meaning and joy in life? But I think there will be like enough things to do, especially like with young people. I think
Like what?
you're easier.
Or how do I prepare myself for
Well,
this? Because I'm probably also one of the people who are going to be fucked by, not fucked, but like
I don't think so, no. But I think what's interesting, maybe like take a step back and some ultimate this analogy was like people always thought that the automation is gonna happen more kind of like from the physical side, the like blue collar labor, and then go to
mm,
like white collar. But actually, what we see right now is maybe it will be the other way around. Where it's this more like creative work.
totally.
And I think part of it is because it's like so much of it is happening online, and there's like data about how people actually do this work, and also doing things in physical world is like more time consuming, is difficult, and with software it's like easier. You can experiment faster, and everything. That we might see a lot of the like other way around. Where like GitHub Copilot can already write like code, to solve problems quite easily.
Yeah,
And like I don't think that like programmers will necessarily get automated away like really quickly, but the job will be quite different.
like
Yeah,
consultants, like if I was McKinsey, I would buy like OpenAI or one of these companies until I think because right now
yeah,
they still have like they just probably have more money than them and they could do that. But I can see AI being a prime like or leveraging that technology in order to just hey, my revenues are down. I don't know what's going on. Instead of calling up Bain or McKinsey or BCG, you just kind of dump a lot of data into a model and it gives you a recommendation.
yes. Also, but this is an interesting point of like when consultants kind of, but that's interesting because I just think that consultancies will actually be relatively like I think consultants are very adaptable, because they can consult on anything. So they will be like, now we consult you on your AI transformation, and there's like a big element of human touch in like consultancy as well, because you build like relationship with the client, you advise
Hand
them.
holding,
So
yeah.
exactly right. So I think there they might actually be more on the safe side for now, because I just think that like jobs where it's a lot about like relationship building and stuff will probably be on the safer side, because we do like humans and prefer to interact with them. And I think maybe some like nurses, for example, I would like think it's a safe bet for like the next 30 years.
Got it. So for now,
Uh,
the message for kids at school is like, stay in school. It's gonna be fine. Like we gotta figure it out.
yeah, no, I don't also want to
Maybe
sound like
learn,
super
maybe learn how to
alarmist. Yeah.
like ask your dad or mom to teach you a few like of the things that they know how to do in
Yeah.
terms of sewing or being a plumber. So just in case you need a gig, but overall, like investing in your education
Yeah.
is gonna have some payoff. Or
I think if I had like a message maybe to like beyond, I think what's going to happen is that there are going to be a lot of really, really cool tools that one can use, and to be maybe on the lookout a little bit for that and just like play around it, have fun. Yeah, like GitHub Copilot, like the like writing
what is
assistants.
GitHub Copilot?
Oh, it's like the service that provides code auto completion for you, Microsoft, right? So it's kind of
Okay,
like a writing assistant, but for code. Uh,
nice.
yeah, and it's actually really, really good, like surprisingly so.
Speaking
Uh,
of cool tools and building new stuff, you want to build something in AI. How are you thinking about that?
yeah, yeah. So I've been thinking about it for quite a little bit for the last 2 months, as you know, as part of EF. Yeah, the honest answer, I still don't really know. Uh, but what I find kind of like interesting is that there is this a little bit of commoditization of AI. Like it's actually, I think, easier than ever to maybe build something using artificial intelligence. There's been almost like infrastructure you can imagine built to do this. Like using
Mm,
GPT-3, it really is easy as an API call. I mean, it can get expensive on like your unit economics depending on the service you build, but like just to like try it out is actually like super simple. Um, and I think what's gonna happen is also like trying to figure out the angles of actually how to bring a lot of the values that AI can create. And there's a lot of these like solutions that are now easier to deploy than ever, and brings them to the users like workflow right now to make it easier. So this like idea, for example, of a copilot, right? GitHub Copilot is like an example for a copilot for coders, right? And a lot of people imagine there will be the same like for lawyers and salespeople, etc. Where it's like super a lot of help in writing
it already
contracts.
exists though,
Autocom.
right? Like there's like there are these tools for like sales to help them with lead generation, and then they provide them. They have these things like I don't know where the name came from, but they call them battle cards. So there are companies
Right.
that I think like Clue or like Crayon or something, and like basically it's I don't know if they use AI, but like you're a salesperson, you're giving a list of leads to call, and then they have like on the side these little like information sheets of like, hey, what this person kind of, what are their buying habits, or who are they working with,
Mhm.
what is their industry about, and these little snippets that help them perform better in their jobs. So that's already happening. What's like the next thing though? So we get there's stable diffusion, there's like playing of images, creativity, incredibly cool. And then you have these pilot tools kind of that
Mhm.
help you guide you in terms of
Copilot. Yeah.
co-pilot, yeah, tools. Maybe pilot in the future.
Yeah.
Switching seats. Um, what else though? What's like the big thing? Like what could you build that's gonna be like the next Google in this?
What can you build? It's gonna be the next Google. This is a good question.
Because you seem like an ambitious guy, and I know you really wanna do something big. So what is it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still figuring it out. But to maybe on this like interest
Or what are
example
other
with
people thinking?
Google,
Yeah.
yeah, and there are some people who think that um, actually search specifically is going to be like really, really transformed because what you get, and there's this like very interesting like almost analogy between like search and some of these models, like large scale models, so they can able to generate stuff. Because in some ways they are almost they're like compressors. They compress a lot of like information that's been like through them, right? So with like GPT-3 can be like President Joe Biden was born in like, and then it auto completes a year, you know. So it's kind of like somewhere in there it like stores the information, or like who is the president of the United States, and gives you the answer.
Mm.
Sometimes it actually says Donald Trump still, so wouldn't trust it necessarily. That's the problem with like
Well,
models. They
man,
still,
the election.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
kidding.
I made the same joke actually. GPT-3 does not believe in the fairness of election now.
Yeah.
um, so like the way we interact with search might change quite a bit if you can actually like directly like ask a question, almost like you can ask a human being. Because the
Mm.
way people like type something into Google, maybe it's not necessarily, you know, how would
Mhm.
you ask a person about something? But we're kind of like trained a little bit now to know like maybe I'll try these keywords and these keywords. But it could be more actually like conversational, where you almost have like a conversation. And I do think things like, I mean, I'm not like a super big fan. I don't use them a lot, like Alexa and Siri and stuff. But I think just like as a concept of this like assistants and how good they can get, I
Mm.
think will be just like amazingly good. And I think what some companies also is doing is like looking into, okay, how much we can actually automate what people are doing when they interact, for example, with websites, right? So like you need to book something and you can just like say, okay, I want to book a hotel, you know, in like Paris, you know, for this night. And then it automatically maybe will just like go straight to it because it can understand like the content on the website and what the action means and like how to fill in your data, etc. Uh, which I think is also very interesting. Like there will be, yeah. I mean, generally, some people do think that search is one of the things. Because it's funny that you say it's the next Google, because it could be that the way people search for stuff or just like interact when they need to find information might be a bit different.
Interesting.
As it would be really cool. But it's also interesting because Google is like the company that has all of the
Yeah.
like brightest minds in this
That's what I
area.
was
So
gonna
I'm
say.
also like, I don't know if they will be just the one doing this innovation, because I know most of there will be other companies doing this. Hard to
Probably,
say.
like, how do you
Yeah.
start? Like, there's you, right? And we could partner up and start to try to like build the next Google, or it is Google that has like billions,
Yeah.
right?
Not only that, they have like all of their researchers who kind of
Exactly.
like
The
who do
human,
this kind of work,
the
you know?
human
So almost like,
capital,
yeah.
the capital, like like so. I just thought about like, what about like artificial humans? Because there's this artificial intelligence, right, that can help
Mhm.
be like a co-pilot for us, but like in the movie Ex Machina, there's like actually like say like you're actually a robot that
I haven't
has
actually seen the movie. Sorry.
but do you
Disclaimer.
know the premise or
Remind me.
what it does it basically
Uh,
there's like this guy, I mean I don't want to spoil, but there's like
sorry.
there's a
Mhm.
artificial human, right? There's like a kind of a
Mhm.
robot that looks like an actual person,
Mhm.
and they are it's an AI, it's also like an AI.
Mhm.
Are we Is this something that you would be interested in working or developing, or you're purely just enabling like the development of intellectual power that could be leveraged by humans?
Like you mean like a complete artificial human?
Yeah,
Huh. That's
like
interesting.
a different or like better Maxim,
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. I find it interesting because I do think at some point we are a little bit we tend to like anthropomorphize a lot, and like when you imagine kind of like AI and stuff, you often imagine like a robot, right? And it already gives it like a physical embodiment, right? But like why? Because actually what is more likely to look like is just like one of those data centers, which is some basement that is cooled. And just like there's just a bunch of servers that are just doing like some really, really complex computation, But and unlike like a robot, maybe it can see from like thousands of cameras or just scraping the internet all the time. So when you think about like kind of like physical embodiment and the kind of inputs that you get and the kind of input that it will be getting, it's just like earth and sky. Yeah, so I don't really think that maybe necessarily the AI issue will look like that, or maybe it's definitely interesting slash fun to build. I can imagine artificial humans, also maybe also ethically questionable. But when I think about like what AI will kind of like look more like and stuff, I don't necessarily think there will be like any physical. I mean, there will be physical embodiment in the sense of this, like a data centers, but I don't think it will be kind of like robots moving around necessarily.
Actually,
Yeah.
thought about like in terms
Uh-huh.
of other applications, it's like you're focusing on our health, right? And just
Mm.
like calorie counting and knowing what's your nutrients intake, and there are these tools for helping with measuring your sleep. You have these like rings or whatnot, right?
Mm-mm.
But like actually measuring or like helping you have a solid diet, that's still because you have to have an app and you have to put in everything that you've eaten, and sometimes you're off. Or is there a way to kind of maybe help society become healthier um, by leveraging this technology?
Hmm. I'm sure there is. Yeah, I don't know. I think when it comes to like health, the thing to really figure out now is a lot about like actually tracking. Maybe I think a lot of people just don't really track what they do. Like I'm sure
Yeah.
that like if you got a lot of data about what you eat and how you feel about this, you could use that data to maybe do like a better recommendations on what you should eat, right? Or if you would be, I don't know, constantly using some devices to measure like, okay, I ate this today and now like my body's reacting like that.
Mm.
Um, and I'm sure that artificial intelligence would be able to like find patterns and recommendations there. But I do think the problem is, and it's a problem in a lot of this, like any artificial intelligence, like ML applications, like how do you get the data, what the data quality is like? And they would be like, okay, what are you actually measuring slash you can do? Right? But yeah, no, in the future, I do imagine like, I think the way generally like the way people eat is not very optimized at all, right? We just tend
Yeah.
to eat like whatever we find on the shelves, which is not very great. I experiment a little bit with like keto diet. I take like supplements and stuff.
What do you take?
I take like vitamin D, magnesium, um, a bunch of other stuff that I'm blanking out on. B12, omega 3. Yeah.
You should probably like just eat better now. Like you can get that stuff in your if you go
Uh,
and like anyway, we don't have to discuss that.
yeah, no.
Speaking of like
Just like my mom on the podcast. You should just eat better, young man.
yeah, I'm just like,
Yeah.
or you can spend a bunch of money on these pills.
Yeah.
Going to like concrete applications, because you actually spent like almost 3 years working at a startup that focused on machine learning and
Mhm.
AI. What was that startup's mission? Like, what did you do there?
Yeah. No, like we weren't actually. So when I joined Luminovo,
That's the name of the
they were
startup. Yeah.
yeah, it's the name of the startup. There was a deep learning consultancy. So we had like a bunch of smaller projects. Some of them around, like for example, computer vision, and should probably not go too much into details. But stuff like maybe counting what's in the warehouse. Because there would be like a drone going around there, and you have like your camera, and it's kind of like, okay, here's a box of this type, etc.
Mm.
Or there would be stuff with like document classification, where it's like worked with a document like storage company, and they wanted to know if the document is black and white and color can be saved, right? Because it's like cheaper to save a black and white. Actually, in terms
Mhm.
of memory, so they'd be like, okay, so this is just we can save this as black and white, and this one we should save it in color. Yeah, but then actually we wanted to the company pivoted to like consultancy is great, but you cannot really like scale it. Sometimes you like go big or go home in the same that a lot of the startups are, as you know. So then the founders say ideated sort of about like which industry they can go into and use AI to really tried to revolutionize it, and they ended up on electronics industry. Very big in Germany, very like fragmented market, and there's generally in the electronics industry like and a lot of people think it's gonna happen, it just hasn't happened yet, is that it's very like fragmented. There's a lot of steps that you need to do, and it's gonna get like kind of like vertically integrated a lot, right? So like
Was it
maybe if you
already?
wanna
Like Samsung,
yeah,
LG?
with Samsung, LG, but there's also a bunch of like smaller companies, right? So for example, we work with like electronics manufacturing services, EMS,
Mm.
right? Which is like if you're an OEM, so like a developer, and you want to make like a remote or
What EM
something.
stands for, since people know.
That's a good question. I honestly don't remember, but yeah, imagine like developer, like you kind of sound like Apple. You know, you want to manufacture a phone, you want to manufacture like a remote, and you like make it. But of course, you need a lot of like special hardware to actually make the thing, right? Like, so you make a design for it, sorry, and then to actually physically like manufacture it, you would go to one of the services and be like, "Can you please make this for me? This is like the bill of materials. This is like cut file, you know." And then they have the machine to actually build the thing. Um, yeah, and the vision for the company is actually to make the iteration cycle much slower by helping to integrate all of this information, and then in the future to actually provide this to the developers. So like imagine you're doing something and you're like, okay, I'm going to change this in my design,
Mm.
and then you immediately know what impact it will have on the like manufacturing of that. You know, instead of you like right now, the process would be like you would send an email to manufacturers and you send to like 10 of them because you want to get like the cheaper quote, and it's like an email with like an Excel file attached, and you're like how much it's going to cost, and then someone in the like manufacturing side will like check, do they have the parts, how much it will cost them to get the parts, etc., and then they will provide a quote, and the guy will accept or not accept, you know, etc. Yeah, and I think the vision for the future is that all the information and the stakeholders got integrated into one platform where you can like very quickly and easily get information about how it costs, what are the risks with manufacturing it, can you find the right parts, etc. But yeah, also I feel like founders that Lumino or Timo Nozepa would explain it way better.
Yeah, totally.
No.
So again,
But but actually the one thing I want to say is like we actually went in a little bit thinking like, okay, we're gonna use like our artificial intelligence to like revolutionize how the things are done, you know. And like what we found is that it does. There were a lot of problems to solve, kind of like first, you know. And I like to joke that like we did enough AI to know to not use AI for any of the problems that we faced. And a lot of the things we did, like we need, for example, to process a bill of materials to actually extract the relevant information from there because they're all Excel files. And you could make an argument that like you could have used machine learning for some of the like recognizing of like, oh, this is like an MPN manufacturer.
quick like difference between AI and machine learning.
Right, yeah. So machine learning would be like a specific subset of AI where you actually train, you kind of like have some data that you train on to optimize for a certain function, right? So machine actually kind of like learns something as opposed to, as this is what I said, you know, like you can write like a checkers engine that just like tries to play like 100 moves ahead and then like choose, and you would call it machine learning because it's just like a hard-coded rules. You can like look at the algorithms and be like, oh yeah, okay, I get this. Whereas machine learning, it was be more around like, okay, this was the data that was trained on kind of like and optimized for this function over with this like training function or like process, and this in the end you get like weights, but you get some models that you can apply. But yeah, and deep learning specifically is yeah, using deep neural networks, like a technique in machine learning where you use deep neural networks, you know.
Okay. Neural networks, and what are neural networks in that scenario?
Yeah, I feel like we're diverging a little bit from the original Lumino point, but it's okay. So neural networks.
Just like sorry,
Yeah,
it's like a side topic, but like,
it's the machine learning models that actually got a lot of inspiration from the way the human neurons work. It's like very abstractly, and literally what you have is like super simple. You have a bunch of inputs. You apply nonlinear functions on them, and you get like one output. Like so, if you imagine like your biology kind of like textbook neurons, where we have the kind of like dendrites and axon. It's kind of like very similar structure, and it like turns out that if you stack a bunch of neurons together in like a layer, and then you combine these layers together, and applies that for machine learning with gradient descent, then you can get really, really good outputs. Pretty much. But yeah.
Good outputs being
A good performance, I mean. So,
okay.
yeah.
Got it.
Like
Going
very
back
high
to
level.
Lumino.
Yeah, I back to Minova because we didn't like say for what we thought would deliver the most value is more like a web platform where EMS and OEMs collaborate, and from there we like plan to expand much more, but it wasn't. There's no like deep learning that, for example, we're using there right now. No. Maybe I think in the future it might happen, but like yeah, exactly. I think there's a lot of. I found it a little bit to be the case in AF generally when you look into like the problems with if you want to build like a B2B SaaS, for like German SMEs and stuff. I think there's a lot of work to be done.
Would like to do that
before a lot of people in our cohort know a lot of work to be done because for AI and machine learning specifically, you do need like data. A lot of it someone's like tracking. You need like yeah, good idea. You need like a certain infrastructure built before, basically. So if you're working with a business that's maybe not very like digital, I think you would just like very, very much struggle to find a good like use case. I mean, of course, maybe like in manufacturing, you can come in there with your like robot that would do like manual work, but it's kind of like different a little bit. Yeah, no. So I think in our case it was kind of like a lot of work to be done when it comes to just bringing these processes into being more digital, and
One
less
thing that I
about.
don't get, like, okay, you're there and it turns from like a consultancy to building what, or like focusing on what exactly?
We built like a web app for
Okay.
electronics manufacturers. Yeah, EMS.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry. So you mentioned that, but like in
Mhm.
you leaving from that, having mentioned that Google is one of the most powerful companies who already has like the brilliant minds working on, AI,
Mhm.
has the resources. Why wasn't your next step just to kind of jump ship from Luminovo and go to Google? Like they probably accept you, like you're a smart
Right.
person.
To be honest, I was just like super, super excited on the like startup journey. Like Lumos, like, and it has
Tell me
amazing,
more. Yeah,
amazing
why?
culture, amazing like people. And back then, I was actually just like focused very much on it, just on AI, uh, like university. And then it was like, this is what I like about startups. Like you get to wear a lot of different hats. You can try out different things.
Mm.
So during those 2 years, like I mean, I worked on the back end, I worked on front end. I was also helping out a little bit on the DevOps. Then I worked a bit later closer to our PMs and designers to help like prioritize things. So I got like experience in a bunch of different areas. But I do think what I realized recently is like, that AI thing was really good and I do want to get back into it. But I think it really helped me to be more of a like, oh yeah, I really do want to do this thing for like the next 10 years. Because I think before, you always kind of think about like what you miss out on, especially like if you haven't tried many things where you're like, oh, maybe that's interesting, but I've never tried this. And then like you try a bunch of different things and you think like, no, actually, like, this is what I want to do.
Still, the
Exactly.
question stands.
Yeah.
I get it. So you want to be an AI. Why wouldn't you go work at Google? Because there you probably have like literally a playground for yourself to immerse yourself there. Sit next to the guy or girl who is like the top expert in the field. Um, instead of trying to build something on your own without any of the aforementioned in terms of just like access and resources.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I do think that this goes back a little bit to my point about commoditization, maybe of AI, where it's like I think there's maybe a gap between what's actually like the research where it's going and the applications. I think there's potentially a lot of values that can be created in this gap, where you like say, okay, we can actually, build these tools for people to do creative writing much better. We can figure out the right UI. I mean,
Mm.
that's kind of like solved, but it would be a great example with Jasper, And same with like maybe creative industries, like okay, and yeah, exactly. And I think it will continue that the research will be going forward really, really quickly, um, and finding ways to
And you just see
build
yourself
like products.
leveraging that research to make
But
it
yeah, I mean, it's something that I just find very
into a
interesting, and then you can
business.
also like think about like, okay, what can you actually do with this, like practically,
Yeah,
But
just
I do think like people like when you think about like people don't still interact with AI that much often unless you're interested, Like
yeah.
unless you have searched for like copywriting assistant, you probably haven't used one. Like yeah, Stable Diffusion is on the news, but like, and I mean, it's not really true because I think you get a lot of applications that you can see of machine learning day to day. For example, like with recommendations, right? You go on YouTube and it's like,
Yeah.
who knows what magic they use to figure out what to recommend you next, like Amazon or any of those companies, or like feeds, like on TikTok or like Facebook. Um, but it's not yet the case that people would be like, oh yeah, of course I have like an AI assistant that helps me day to day, right? But I bet that it would change. Like 10 years from now, I think it would be like super, super common. People would be using it for writing. People would be
No,
using it for
totally.
their
I
jobs.
get it. But
Yeah. Mhm.
what? So how do you even get into this? Because I'm trying to wrap my head around like how do you start a company in AI? Like how do you become an entrepreneur who you mentioned B2B SaaS, like okay, you see a case, you can quickly leverage the existing technology just to bundle whatever service there are out there. Um, and build a company that helps with like spend management, right? It's not that hard to build. It's more about execution, the idea itself. What is the challenge here? Because obviously you have the ambition to build something yourself, right?
Mhm.
But what are you gonna build? Like, and I don't know. I know you don't have like a clear answer, but
Mhm.
how do you even build? Like, what would be an example of a company that already has been like a started a year ago, and they're like a success story in terms of being an AI startup? I know there's a bunch of money flowing in. I just saw some charts like last year. I don't know, like a lot of money went into AI
Mhm.
startups. What are these startups actually about?
I think a good example maybe of specifically around like large language models would be something like Jasper. It's a again writing assistance, for copywriting, and I think they're like one of the most fast growing SaaS businesses in the world, right? They're
What's their
doing really
story,
well.
or like Grammarly? What's like?
Grammarly is not the one, but maybe it was like Grammarly. Actually, I'm not so sure about their story, but with Jasper, like I think the guys were actually in this kind of like copywriting ad space for a very very long time,
Mm,
like for like 8 years or something. But before that, they tried to do like courses or something, but they basically like experimented, and it wasn't like going like amazingly well. And then GPT-3 came out, and I think the founder actually had this like Twitter thread about it, and they had this image from the conversation about like we got open access to GPT-3. I'm gonna like spin up some front end, and they're like, oh yeah, it's a big thing now. Um, yeah, no, and since then it was been like what 2-3 years maybe,
yeah.
and they already like I don't know raising 100 million or something. Yeah,
Okay, so it's
so
something.
that would be like yeah, exactly a good example. But here's the thing that they nailed, and I think there are some a lot of like VCs things that will be the case where you would be thinking about having kind of like the data flywheel and optimizing for like a specific user group, right? So this is kind of like example. Okay, they use GPT-3 and they try to figure out how to best apply it for like copywriting, for people who work in marketing. And then, like as I said before, there will be a lot of thinking about like, okay, what about like the other professions? Like writing contracts, writing maybe like fighting German bureaucracy, whatever. Working with documents, filling out forms. I think a lot of it will revolve around really nailing actually the UI. Maybe just having it as like a small part of like a bigger product, where it's like an
Okay. So
assistant,
it's been like
and focusing on like a specific maybe like user group on like specific industries. That's why like I like the term like copilot for X, and because you kind of like think like X can be like almost anything, but you try to nail it
so you're not
for
gonna
a
like
specific
you're
industry.
not gonna create a new piece of, or like you're not gonna augment or create like a new type of artificial intelligence. It's just like
Right, right,
whatever
right.
is out there,
But
you are just bundling it and creating a incredible user interface and a user experience
that could be one
targeted.
angle. But there's actually an interesting point. There's like it all comes also to data.
Mm,
And when you focus on specific, maybe like niche industry, what you can do is like fine tune, right? So fine tuning for larger models, like say kind of like train the models almost like I don't want to say very randomly, but they just get like as much data as they can, right? And they train on it. It could be like all of like Wikipedia, right? And then you can do fine tuning where you say, okay, now I want to train it on like the legal contracts just, right? So it will be better at generating, for example, the text in there, right?
mm.
Yeah, and like then you can maybe have models for like specific purposes, where you have a model that's really good at writing, I don't know, Facebook posts, for example. Yeah, and that would be kind of like angle, and some people call it like the like almost like the flywheel that you get. We have like users, they interact with it, what recommendations are better, get data, and then you like fine tune, and then it's kind of like gets even better. So more users interact with it, and you get like a positive effects there. Yeah.
Got it. Want to get into your psychology in
Okay.
terms of switching from being an employee in the past few months, you've been on your own, and like, what was the shift, and how do you find yourself in this new setup where you're working for yourself and want to build something? Um, I have a few thoughts of my own, but I'm curious, like, what was the transition for you, and do you enjoy this? And like, why is it? Does it feel like it's liberating? What's the feeling of being a founder or a person who is looking to build a business and no longer working for someone else?
Hmm. I would to a certain degree say it's like liberating. It's also like a bit stressful, right? Because like when you have like a job, then
Totally,
there's kind
yeah.
of like, okay, I'm doing something, there's like clear value that I'm like providing here and there for like the company and stuff. And right now, especially like this in exploratory early stages, you're kind of like you're learning a lot, you're exploring, but there's also not like, oh, I mean, we made this amazing thing for someone. It's like, as you know, we've been doing a lot of just interviews and talking to people.
Yeah.
um, but overall, I actually like building a company has been something that's been on my radar for like a long time. I did think like I find like the startup stories and really, really interesting. And also it just happens that a lot of things have aligned in my life recently where I was like, okay, now I can really take this jump to
What
do
needs
it.
to what needs to align in one's
So
life
there's like
too?
certain things like after working at Lumino, I felt like I have better idea what like it really means. Got pretty good experience around being like, okay, I think I can do this. Kind of like, I could build a web app and I could, integrate AI into it, or build like machine learning models and train them for some application. And also, I got my German visa. You would think that's not important, but it is. So,
Congrats.
yes. I was actually also, yeah, a bunch of things. Where I was like, yeah, now's a good time. I can try it. Sure.
Totally. Is there a you like you're interested, or you like startup stories and startups? Like, is there a startup that you really admire, look, or like read about a lot?
That's a good question. So I mean, I did listen to the stories from like um Facebook, what call it, that one I admire. But I mean, the stories are really cool. Or like, for example, Tesla, SpaceX. But the one that actually I find amazing, not really like necessarily a startup, but actually a startup. Like, have you read the book Creativity Inc?
No.
By any chance? It's by one of the founders of Pixar, and I just thought reading the book that the way, the kind of like culture that they had, and kind of like how he approached like the on honesty, open feedback communication, like creativity in organization. I found it like really, really amazing. I can highly recommend
Creativity Inc.
Creativity Inc. Yeah, I can highly recommend the book. And it's not really like your typical like maybe tech story,
Yeah.
but I generally like in terms of thinking of like company building and culture. I just found it an amazing story, and
What kind of
it's like
culture do you want to have in your company?
yeah, it's a good question. I think there's like a few things. So one thing Luminova did really well is they the founders really advocated for the kind of psychological safety. Basically, when a person feels like safe enough to express their opinions, be heard, they don't think like, oh my god, no, I can't say that at a job or anything like that. Uh, Poorly explained. That's
Psychological safety sounds
psychological
kind of
safety.
like, oh, like kind of like safe spaces. They have these things at universities where you have to be very careful what you say, and like
No,
not to
no,
hurt
that's
anyone's
exactly that's
feelings.
exactly the opposite. You want people to be able to say what they think. Yeah, exactly.
Radical candor, also, and I guess
Yeah, yeah, like
feedback.
on those lines, pretty much. Yeah, I did find the Radical Candor book. I found it amazing. Actually, I really, really liked it.
Mm.
It was on the EF reading list, right? So, um, yeah, and I think generally, like I would say, feedback giving and receiving it is like super, super important for me. And I want to build a culture or be in a culture where it's super accepted. Because like when you really think about it, like there's not like the people you work with, I know you don't really like. I also don't really always like when people are like, always like bring your whole self to work or like work as family, blah 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 stuff.
Has to
But
be a team, a
I do
highly
think, yeah, yeah,
performing
high
team.
performing team. That's a Netflix
Yeah.
analogy that I heard that I also like. But I think like when you think about like the people who are in position to give you like really really good feedback about what you do in work, but also that I think translates very easily to just like your day to day life. I actually like your colleagues or like your manager because they kind of like see you do stuff. They see you under stress very often potentially, and they usually also have like good experience maybe so they can say like what's working, what doesn't work. I think for me, it's like super, super important to be in the culture where people will be able to say like, oh, I saw you did this and that was well, like that wasn't well, or you could work on this, etc. And I generally think it's like when it comes to like self-improvement, which is like also like a value, it's important to me. I think feedback is crucial, and then having someone who actually like people who work with you can actually have the right information to give that feedback, to have them being open to do that at any time, super important.
You mentioned like you left Lenovo and you thought about building your own thing because you already had the learnings. Kind of you realized you can do this on your own, but
And I would also say I wanted to go back into AI.
yeah, totally. But we most of the learnings that happen in our lives happen through or usually through like also failure. I'm curious, like what are your fuck ups that you had in the beginning of your career that you really kind of made you who you are now?
Hmm. Fuck ups in the beginning of my career. That's a good question. Like, it's not that I don't have fuck ups. It's like I feel like I have many. uh, but
Whatever
I'm
comes to
just
mind first
like,
doesn't have to be like some, incredible one. It doesn't have to be like a I'm not looking here for a
uh,
story.
uh,
I'm
uh,
just
uh.
curious.
um, I started maybe from university. I think I kind of wished I gotten like more just like internships, because what you kind of learn is like right now it's kind of weird to do, but it's super great to just come to a company for like 3 months. That's actually like an amazing experience because you come in, you get to know like all of the things that they do, and then you kind of like, oh, cool, and then you might even be
Have
able to get
zero
a job or not.
responsibility and just like try a bunch of things and then they could just leave. Okay, fuck
Yeah,
it.
I know. Like, in retrospect, I was like, internships were amazing. I should have done them like much more. And since like first, I mean, I did like two of them in the 2 summers in like universities. One was with a research group. Um, there, I also like fucked up. I think I didn't get asked for like feedback. I think I had like a very bad syndrome of like, oh, I'll just try to figure it out on my own. And I would be
Mm,
more like, okay, first like I will spend however much time I need talking to the like professor and the people at research group until I really get what I'm doing. Because like without that, I'm just like not maybe giving that much value as like you think you are.
yeah.
So that would be one, instead of being like, oh, let me try to read some papers, understand. Um, then in the next, I also interned at Rada Medical, which was like company applying deep learning for contouring of like MRIs. So like trying to find the tumors there and contour it, or helps the like radiologist to contour them faster. It's also horribly explained, but on high level. Yes, I don't think I don't remember like huge fuck ups. So that
That's
was
good,
okay.
man. I
Yeah,
mean,
I know. And generally, like with Luminovo, I think we had a bunch of things we could have done better in terms of prioritization, or like just trying to build things quicker, just to see, how like the startup ways where you just like try to do something quickly, get reaction,
mhm.
and maybe even like hacker slash using different, maybe easier like solutions. No, but this like fuck up is a big word. You just learn from things, you keep trying. It's like normal things.
I
I don't think anything
always, or I
special.
usually ask this
Uh-huh.
parting or like ending question. What's your advice to people who, or like even to your, like, what's your life philosophy? It's something you can like tell yourself when you're down, or like some guiding principle.
Some guiding principles, life advice. I do like stoicism quite a lot,
Mm,
and I do think you have so many things in life. You have like, oh, I want to do this, maybe like ego or just like problems. And what it really comes down to is focus on the things you can control, because whatever else in life you can kind of like, the only things that you really control in life or can focus on are your own decision and what you do. And maybe it's not like what you want it to be, your life, maybe it's not what you expect. But I think at the end it comes down like almost like day to day, very locally. Am I taking the right decisions? Am I focusing on what I can control? And just doing that. You know, yeah. I think that's important for me, and some like it helps me to remember those words.
let it be.
Yeah.
Right. This is wonderful,
Speaking words
man.
of wisdom.
Yeah.
Let it be.
Thanks, man.
Thank you.
Cheers.